A struggling single dad thought he was just doing his job until he saw something drifting in the river that would change everything. She had no name, no voice, and no past anyone could trace. But the moment their paths crossed, nothing would ever be the same again. If you're someone who believes in second chances, quiet heroes, and the kind of stories that stay with you long after they end, this one's for you. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that might just move your heart. Let's begin. Struggling. Single dad saved a drowning girl. Her DNA matched a child who vanished in 2008. The fog rolled in early that morning, thick and silent, swallowing the riverbank like a ghostly tide. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the old dam, steam from his coffee cup swirling into the mist. He'd worked this shift more times than he could count, just him, the water, and the crumbling concrete bones of a structure built before his time. Nothing ever happened out here, not anymore. That's what made the scream so strange. It wasn't even a scream, not really. Just a sound, sharp human wrong, rising over the hush of the current. Ethan's boots hit the gravel before his brain caught up. He dropped the coffee, sprinted toward the noise heart, lurching like it hadn't in years. He rounded the embankment and stopped cold. There. Floating, half-submerged in the river caught against the far bank, was a girl. No older than 16 or 17. Pale as bone. Her hair fanned around her head like dark ink in the water. She wasn't moving. "Hey," he shouted, already pulling off his jacket. "Hang on," Ethan dove in without thinking. The shock of the icy water stole his breath, but instinct took over. He kicked hard arms, cutting through the current, ignoring the burn in his lungs. He reached her in seconds, though it felt like hours, and looped his arm beneath her shoulders. She was heavier than she looked, dead weight. "Please, not dead," he begged silently. "Not today." He hauled her toward the shallows, stumbling onto the muddy shore, slipping on slick rocks. Kneeling beside her, he checked for a pulse. A flicker. Faint, but there. She was alive. Come on," he muttered, pressing down with shaking hands. She coughed violently, water gurgling from her mouth. Then silence. Her eyes blinked open. They were wide, glassy, unfocused, but locked on his face. "It's okay," Ethan said, voice low, steady. "You're safe now. You're all right." But she didn't speak, didn't move. She just stared at him like she was trying to decide if he was real. The paramedics came fast, summoned by Ethan's shaking voice over the radio. The girl was loaded onto the stretcher without a sound. Still mute. Still watching. "What's her name?" the EMT asked as they loaded her into the ambulance. Ethan could only shake his head. She didn't say a word. Any ID, no wallet, no bag. Nothing. The EMT frowned. "She's lucky you found her." "Another 10 minutes in that water, and I know," Ethan said quietly. He watched the red lights disappear into the fog heart, still pounding. Then, without another word, he walked back to his truck, wet to the bone and colder than he'd been in years. He didn't drive home. He drove to the hospital. "Mr. Cole." The voice stopped him in the hallway. A woman in a gray coat stood near the nurse's station, a clipboard tucked under her arm. Early 40s, sharp eyes, posture military straight. "I'm Dr. Elena Martin, forensics and trauma pathology. You're the man who pulled the girl from the river, yeah, Ethan Cole." He offered a hand, which she didn't take. "She's stable. No major injuries, but severely hypothermic. She hasn't said anything, not a word. She didn't resist treatment. No signs of head trauma or neurological damage, but she's unresponsive, verbally catatonic, possibly." "She looked right at me," Ethan said, like she was trying to tell me something but couldn't. Dr. Martin's expression didn't change. "I've seen this before. Shock dissociation. Maybe abuse. We'll need time. Will she be okay? I hope so." He hesitated. "Can I sit with her?" "She's not a prisoner, Mr. Cole, but don't expect answers." The room was dim. She lay on the hospital bed beneath a blanket, arms wrapped tightly around her midsection. Her eyes fluttered open when he entered, but she didn't speak. Ethan pulled a chair close. "Hey," he said softly. "Just me again." Silence. But she didn't look away. "You scared me back there," he said. "Figured maybe today would be like every other day. Water fog, maybe a raccoon in the trash. But then you showed up." He gave a small smile. "I guess that means today wasn't a waste." Still no answer, but her eyes blinked once. Slow, deliberate. He stayed there for hours. Down the hall, Dr. Martin sat at her desk reviewing intake reports. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The girl's vitals were strong. Her body showed signs of mild malnutrition, some minor scarring. No fingerprints in the system. No match in local missing persons. No name. No belongings. Just a silent girl pulled from a river. Out of habit, she keyed into the federal database and entered a cross-check request. "Age range 16 to 18, she murmured. "Female. Caucasian. No identifiers." She clicked Submit. The system blinked once, then began scanning. It would take hours. Ethan sat beside the girl as dusk began to fall outside the window. For a moment, she reached out, not quite touching him, just letting her hand hover inches from his. He didn't move. He just whispered, "You don't have to tell me anything yet. But I'm not going anywhere." And she blinked again. A slow tear tracked down her cheek, the first sign of something real breaking through. And far away, deep in the database of forgotten faces, a red flag blinked to life. Match found. The name appeared on screen, buried under 17 years of dust. Emily Sanders missing since 2008. Presumed deceased. Ethan barely slept. He couldn't shake the image of the girl's eyes staring through him so hollow and full at once. She hadn't said a single word yet. He couldn't stop hearing her silence. The next morning, he returned to the hospital with dry clothes in the back seat, a bag of oranges, and no idea what he was doing. He wasn't family. Not a doctor. He barely held on to his own life. But something about the way she'd looked at him told him she needed someone, maybe not to fix her, but at least to sit in the room and not leave. At the front desk, the nurse gave him a sympathetic smile. "She's awake." Still no name, still no words. "Can I see her?" She gave him a nod. "Dr. Martin's already in there." He paused at the doorway, hearing low voices, only one of them speaking. Elena Martin stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. The girl was sitting upright now, blankets pulled tight to her chest. She still hadn't spoken. "Do you know what day it is?" Elena asked gently. No response. "Do you know your name?" A pause. Then, to Ethan's surprise, the girl reached slowly toward the tray beside her. She picked up a crayon left from a nurse trying to coax a response earlier and began to draw. Ethan stepped in quietly. Elena glanced at him but said nothing. The girl's hand moved deliberately, the crayon scratching softly. When she finished, she slid the paper toward Elena. It was a childlike image, a boat on a river, a girl in the water, and a dark shape reaching out to her, a man. The eyes on the man were sharp, familiar. Elena stared at it, then looked at Ethan. "That's you." He blinked. "She remembers something." Elena murmured. She turned to the girl. "Is this a memory or a dream?" The girl's fingers curled inward. She looked away. "Let's try something easier," Ethan said quietly. He knelt by the bed and opened the bag of oranges. "These any good to you?" The girl's expression didn't change, but she reached out slowly, took one, peeled it with trembling fingers. Juice ran down her wrist. She ate a segment like she hadn't eaten in days. "She trusts you," Elena said after a long silence. "I didn't do anything. That's exactly why." Later that day, Ethan found himself in the hospital cafeteria staring at a vending machine sandwich he had no intention of eating. Elena sat across from him sipping black coffee, looking like she hadn't blinked in an hour. "She's not in any national registry," she said, voice clipped. "No prints, no facial match in missing persons. I submitted a wider scan to the cold case database. It'll take time." Ethan frowned. "But she's not new to this world. You saw how she handled that crayon. How she peeled the orange. She's been somewhere, just not anywhere legal. He looked at her, surprised by the edge in her voice. You think she was trafficked? I think Elena said carefully that someone went to a lot of effort to keep her off the grid. Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. So, what now? I file a report. Child Protective Services gets involved. If they can't ID her, she'll be placed in temporary custody. You mean foster care? Elena nodded. Likely a residential facility until we get answers. She won't make it in there, Ethan said immediately. She won't trust anyone. She shouldn't have to trust anyone. She should have her life back. But if she can't remember her life, what then? Elena didn't answer. The silence between them stretched. Finally she asked, What's your stake in this? I don't know, Ethan said. Maybe I'm just tired of watching things drown. That night in the hospital room the girl drew again. Ethan sat beside her. She didn't flinch when he moved his chair closer. He watched her sketch another scene, a small room, one window with bars, a toy horse on the floor. Then another, drawing an empty plate, a long hallway, shadows at the door. Where was this? He asked gently. She didn't respond, but she looked up at him, eyes wide, and whispered something for the first time. A single word. No. It was breathy thin, but it carried weight. The first crack in a wall too high for most to climb. Ethan swallowed hard. Okay, he said. No more questions tonight. She leaned back, clutching the drawing close like it was a blanket. Her fingers trembled. Outside the room, Elena waited. She saw the look on Ethan's face and didn't need to ask. She said something he whispered. What he hesitated. Just, no. Elena nodded. That's a beginning. At midnight, the database pinged. A quiet chime on Elena's laptop. She opened the match alert and froze. Emily Sanders. Missing since June 2, 2008. Age at disappearance 5. The photo was blurry, but it was her. Same eyes, same shape of the jaw, same silence. Case status presumed deceased. Ethan, standing behind her, read the name aloud. 17 years old. That's her. Elena looked up at him. Emily Sanders is legally dead. Not anymore, he said quietly. They both looked toward the hospital room where the girl had finally fallen asleep. And in that stillness, something old stirred awake the past, clawing its way back through the fog. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the hospital as dawn broke muted light sifting through the fog that clung to the glass. Ethan sat at the edge of the girl's bed, her latest drawing resting in his lap. It was another room, another memory. This one showed a white hallway with no doors and an emergency light above a red exit sign. Below it, in crooked crayon lines, she'd written a word, silent. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it mattered. The door opened behind him with a soft click. Elena entered with a manila folder in hand and an expression that suggested she'd been awake all night. We need to talk, she said, keeping her voice low. Outside. Ethan stood, gave the girl Emily. He reminded himself an encouraging nod and followed Elena into the corridor. They walked down to the staff lounge where she tossed the folder onto a table. A single photo sat on top. A girl, maybe 5 years old, bright-eyed with an uneven bowl cut, stood in a field of tall grass beside a golden retriever. Emily Sanders, Elena said. Disappeared from a campground with her parents in 2008. Parents claimed she wandered off during a thunderstorm. Search teams found nothing. Ethan stared at the image. They were charged worse. They were convicted. Manslaughter. Prosecutors argued they buried her body to avoid losing custody in a pending abuse case. The press ripped them apart. No body, no witnesses, just circumstantial evidence and public pressure. He looked at her. So you're saying this girl's parents are in prison for killing her, and she's been alive the whole time? Elena exhaled slowly. It's more complicated than that. She slid another paper across the table, a copy of the DNA match report. The odds of a false positive are astronomically low. But before we go to the authorities, I need one more test to confirm. What kind of test A? Full nuclear DNA comparison with both biological parents. Ethan folded his arms. That means getting them involved. Yes, and telling them their daughter is alive. Elena hesitated. Not yet. We can't risk emotional interference skewing the investigation. If Emily was taken, and all signs suggest she was, we need to know who did it, where she's been, and whether she's in danger now. She's already in danger, Ethan said. She's 17, traumatized, and the system's going to treat her like a lost wallet. Elena nodded. Which is why I'm trying to keep this quiet until we're ready. There was a beat of silence. Finally, Ethan asked, "Can I keep sitting with her?" "Yes," Elena said. "But be careful what you ask. If those drawings are what I think they are, she's been through something most people can't even imagine." Back in the hospital room, Emily was awake. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed now, flipping through the pages of a sketchbook the nurses had given her. She didn't look up when Ethan walked in, but she didn't flinch either. He sat beside her. "You remember the room?" he asked gently. She gave the smallest nod. Ethan pulled out the photograph Elena had shown him Emily at 5 years old holding the dog. Her fingers twitched. She stared at the photo like it was something pulled from a dream. "This was you," he said. Another pause. Then, shakily, she reached for the photo, touched it, traced the dog's outline. His name, Ethan asked. Emily's lips parted. A breath. Baxter. It was the softest sound, like wind slipping under a door, but Ethan felt it like a thunderclap. He didn't speak. Didn't want to break the fragile thread that had just formed between past and present. Then she looked at him, and her face changed. Terror. She started breathing fast, hands trembling. Her gaze fixed not on him, but over his shoulder toward the door. Ethan turned. A man in a suit stood there. Tall, mid-50s, thinning hair, holding a clipboard and a badge clipped to his coat. Behind him, a social worker. "Sorry to interrupt," the man said calmly. "I'm Agent Roth, Child Welfare Division." Emily shrank back into the pillows. "Not now," Ethan said, standing between them. Roth offered a professional smile. "We need to conduct a brief interview. Just protocol. She's not ready." Roth raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Cole, you're not her guardian. I'm the only one she trusts. And that's precisely why we're here. This girl is the center of a reopened federal case. Her welfare is paramount, and that includes verifying her safety in your presence." Elena entered just then, a storm in her eyes. "Agent Roth, I explicitly requested a delay in all non-medical contact until we had stabilized her psychological state." Roth turned tone sharp. "Doctor, you don't outrank the federal process. If this is Emily Sanders, then her case falls under national jurisdiction." "Then do it right," she snapped. "Not like last time." Silence fell like a dropped weight. Roth gave a short nod. "We'll be back in 24 hours. I suggest you prepare her." He turned and left. Ethan looked at Elena. What did he mean, not like last time? Elena hesitated. The Sanders case was rushed, pressured, evidence mishandled. Some say the trial was a witch hunt. Others say it was a cover-up. And I say we've got a second chance. That evening, Emily didn't draw. She sat curled up, knees to her chest, watching the window as if expecting someone to appear out of the fog. Ethan didn't ask questions. He simply pulled the chair close and sat beside her, keeping the silence intact. When the nurse brought dinner, Emily didn't touch it, but she did whisper just before sleep claimed her. The room had no windows. Ethan's chest tightened. Outside, the fog thickened. And somewhere far from the hospital, a secure server logged a new search subject Emily Sanders' status, located authorization level red access. Denied. The past wasn't just awake. It was watching. The next morning, Ethan woke in the hospital chair with a crick in his neck and a strange tightness in his chest. Emily was still asleep, curled on her side, her sketchbook clutched to her like a lifeline. The hallway outside was quiet except for the hum of the vending machines and the occasional squeak of sneakers on tile. Elena stood at the nurse's station flipping through a printout of legal documents and case history so thick it looked like it belonged in a courtroom. When she saw Ethan approaching, she didn't say good morning. She handed him a stapled packet instead. "This is what the Sanders trial was built on," she said. "A few witness statements, no body, and a blood-stained child's shirt found miles from the campsite. That shirt didn't even have DNA on it, just red fibers and assumptions." Ethan flipped through the pages. They locked up 2 people for 17 years over this. 17 years, 6 appeals, 2 media docuseries, and 1 prosecutor who built his career off the verdict, Elena said bitterly. "He's a judge now." He paused. "So what are we looking for?" "Anything that doesn't add up." She lowered her voice. Emily wasn't just taken. She was erased. The foster system didn't flag her. No medical history, no school, nothing. She didn't just disappear, someone kept her disappeared. Ethan frowned. "Who has that kind of power, Money?" Elena replied. "Connections. Or someone who knew how to hide behind a system that doesn't ask too many questions." He leaned on the counter, arms folded. "So where does that leave us?" She hesitated, then slid a printed photo from her folder. It showed a building, tall, modern, sterile white with mirrored windows and a gated entrance. "Northbridge Institute," she said. "Private research facility just 2 hours north. They ran child behavior programs from 2007 to 2011, mostly off the books, experimental, non-invasive treatments for trauma until they were sued for ethical violations." Ethan stared at the photo. "And you think she was there?" "I found procurement logs from Northbridge showing anonymous, donor-funded clinical placements between 2008 and 2009. One entry refers to a female subject with selective mutism and dissociative behavior. Age 5. No name listed. His breath caught. That's her. I can't prove it, Elena said. Not yet, but we're close. What happens if we do? We push to reopen the trial. Emily's parents could walk free, and whoever held her will finally be exposed. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then we go to Northbridge. Elena gave a faint smile. You read my mind. They waited until the afternoon. The hospital administrator had signed off on Ethan escorting Emily out for fresh air and supervised therapy thanks to Elena's careful wording and a favor called in from an old residency colleague. A small window of freedom, just enough to buy them a drive and a shot at the truth. Ethan drove his old Ford pickup with Emily in the passenger seat and Elena in the back. The girl hadn't spoken again since Baxter, but she didn't resist the seatbelt or the thermos of tea Elena handed her. She looked out the window, silent eyes tracking the trees. Northbridge sat behind a line of tall oaks and a private security gate. From the outside, it could have been a tech company or boutique medical center. But Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach as they pulled in. A receptionist greeted them with a practiced smile and a clipboard. Welcome to Northbridge. Do you have an appointment? Elena stepped forward. Dr. Elena Martin, Oregon, Department of Health. This is an unofficial wellness visit regarding historical patient welfare reviews. We won't take much of your time. The woman blinked. 1 moment, please. A few minutes later, they were escorted down a hallway that smelled of bleach and lavender. Emily's steps grew slower. Her hand slipped into Ethan's without a word. He squeezed it gently. It's okay. You're not alone. In a small interview room, a doctor in his 60s greeted them. Dr. Mallory, trim beard, tailored coat, mild smile, the kind of face built for television. He skimmed Elena's ID with disinterest. We discontinued child behavior programming over a decade ago, Doctor. There's not much left to discuss. I'm sure you understand we're following up on outstanding welfare reviews, Elena said smoothly. Can you verify whether a 5-year-old girl was treated here between 2008 and 2010 under donor funding? We treat thousands of patients, Mallory said. Our records are sealed. Even for a criminal case, Mallory's smile didn't waver. Without a subpoena, I'm afraid I can't assist. Ethan stepped forward. She was here, he said. voice low. Mallory glanced at Emily, who stood half-hidden behind him. Something flickered in the man's eyes just for a second. Recognition. Or guilt. Then he straightened. "I don't know the child, and unless you have documentation, I'll have to ask you to leave." Emily's grip tightened on Ethan's hand. Her whole body was trembling. And then she did something she hadn't done in days. She walked forward, past Ethan, past Elena, right up to Dr. Mallory. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded drawing, unfolded it, held it out. Mallory took it slowly. The color drained from his face. It was the hallway, the one with no doors, the emergency light, the red exit sign, and at the bottom a signature only a 5-year-old would scrawl. Emily. "You remember," Mallory whispered. Emily stepped back and stared him down, unblinking. "I want her file," Elena said, her voice steel. Mallory didn't move. Elena took a step closer. "Either you give me everything you have on her, or tomorrow morning a judge gets a subpoena and every reporter from here to Seattle knows your name." Mallory's hand shook as he opened the filing cabinet behind him. Back in the truck, Emily didn't say a word, but she sat straighter, brighter somehow. Elena held the manila folder tight in her lap, heart pounding. "It's all here," she murmured. "Logs, test protocols, sedative charts. They kept her for almost a year." Ethan looked at Emily in the mirror. She met his eyes. And for the first time she gave him a small, real smile. Not everything lost had to stay buried. Not anymore. The late afternoon sun broke through the Oregon clouds as Ethan pulled the truck onto the winding road that led back to town. The weight of the Northbridge file sat between Elena and Emily like a fourth passenger, silent, heavy, undeniable. Neither spoke for the first 15 minutes. It was Emily who finally broke the silence. "I remember." "A song," she said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the tires on pavement. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What kind of song?" She shook her head, uncertain. It had bells, and it played before lights went out. Elena turned toward her, sensing something important. "Where was the song playing?" "In the room," Emily said. "The white one. They'd play it before they gave me the medicine." Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. "Do you remember who gave it to you?" Elena asked gently. Emily didn't answer. She looked out the window, fingers tightening around the hem of her sleeve. "They said I had a broken brain, that my real name didn't matter anymore." The road dipped into a shaded hollow. Ethan's voice came low and steady. "Your name does matter. It always has." She turned toward him slowly. Then why did everyone forget? No one had an answer. Later that evening, back at the hospital, Elena and Ethan huddled over the Northbridge file in a private conference room. Emily had been cleared by the attending physician for continued outpatient care under the condition that she remain supervised at all times. She was now asleep in a spare room the staff had quietly reserved under Elena's name. The folder revealed a timeline more horrific than either of them expected. Emily had been registered under the pseudonym Subject Delta 15, placed at Northbridge through a grant labeled Experimental Cognitive Reassociation for Early Onset Trauma. No consent forms from guardians. No official medical referrals. The intake form had been signed off by a J. Caro, a name that didn't appear in any Northbridge employee logs. "Fake signature," Ethan muttered. "It's a ghost entry." Or a plant, Elena said. Someone meant to bury her in the system. The file included medical notations, all in technical shorthand, behavioral charts, sedative dosages, even responses to controlled stimuli. It was clinical detached. One note stood out. Scrawled in the margin next to an entry dated August 13, 2009. Subject asked for mother again. Memory degradation incomplete. Further observation recommended. Elena stared at it for a long time. She fought it, she whispered. Even as a child, she resisted what they tried to erase. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. They tried to delete her. Elena flipped to the last page. A discharge summary, dated June 2010. No forwarding address, no transfer record, just one sentence, subject removed. Order external. What does that mean? Ethan asked. Elena's eyes narrowed. It means someone higher up shut it down and made sure she vanished completely. That night, Ethan sat outside the hospital on a bench beneath a flickering security light. He needed air, space, something to separate himself from the monstrous precision of those files. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Ethan Cole," the voice asked. "Yes, this is Natalie Sanders." He froze. "Emily's her mother." "Yes." Her voice was fragile, clipped, but composed. "Dr. Martin sent me an encrypted message. She said you had news about my daughter." Ethan glanced around instinctively. "Not over the phone." "I don't care what you believe. I need to know, please. Is she alive?" He hesitated. Then, "Yes." The line went silent. He heard a gasp, a breath caught somewhere between hope and heartbreak. "I knew it," she whispered. "All these years I swore she wasn't gone." Ethan closed his eyes. "She's safe now, but she's been through hell. Can I see her?" He hesitated again. "We're working with legal to figure out the right way. There's a lot still in motion." "I've waited 17 years," she said, voice trembling. "I can wait one more day, but promise me, please, you won't let her out of your sight." "I won't." She was quiet a moment longer. "Thank you for bringing my daughter back to life." He hung up, chest tight. Inside, Elena checked on Emily before heading home. She found the girl curled beneath a thin blanket, her sketchbook still in her lap. Another drawing had been started. This one was different. It showed 3 figures: Emily, a man with a guitar, and a woman holding a coffee cup sitting on a dock by a river. No cages, no locked rooms, just a quiet place. Hope. Elena stepped into the hall and called someone she hadn't spoken to in years. "Judge Meredith," she said when the line picked up. "Elena, it's been a while. I need a favor. Off the record. It's about the Sanders case." A pause. That case was buried. It's about to surface. The next morning, Ethan found Emily sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, staring out the window at the parking lot below. "I had a dream," she said without turning. "There was a woman, brown hair, green sweater. She called me Munchkin." He smiled softly. "Sounds like a nickname a mom would use." She nodded slowly. "Do you think I'll remember everything I don't know?" he said honestly. "But I think you're remembering what matters." She turned to him then. "Will they believe me?" He didn't answer right away. But then he said, "They're going to hear you, Emily, and they're going to listen this time." Outside, a dark SUV pulled into the hospital parking lot. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, tailored coat, sunglasses, despite the gray sky. He tapped his phone, spoke a single phrase: "She's awake." Proceeding with Phase 2. He looked up toward the hospital window where a girl now stared down at him, and smiled. The next 48 hours moved like a storm front, slow at first, then all at once. Elena worked the phones, looping in contacts from her past life at the state medical board, trying to push the evidence through back channels. Ethan stayed by Emily's side, gently guiding her through each wave of memory as it returned in fragments, some sharp, some surreal. And Emily. She was beginning to speak, not in full sentences, not yet, but in words, real ones, pieces of a life stolen and stitched together by the very system meant to protect her. "Baxter, the blue room, no windows. He said I belonged to the Institute. Don't tell anyone or they'll take your name away again." Each phrase a puzzle piece, each word a dagger to the heart. Elena slid into the hospital cafeteria booth opposite Ethan late that evening, her expression more wired than tired. She had a thick manila envelope tucked under one arm. "I just got off the phone with Judge Meredith," she said without preamble. She agreed to a closed evidentiary hearing. "Unofficial, but admissible if we can prove our source is credible." "You mean," Emily, Ethan said, eyes narrowing. "She doesn't have to testify." "Not yet. Just corroborate enough of the file to justify reopening the case." He nodded. What about her parents? They've been notified. Natalie's holding it together. Her husband. Elena paused. I wouldn't call him stable. 17 years in a cell for a crime he didn't commit does things to a man. Ethan's jaw clenched. When do they see her? Not until we're sure it won't traumatize her further. She needs to lead that decision. Then it's not happening tomorrow. No, Elena agreed. But soon. She slid the envelope toward him. This is everything Northbridge buried. It won't survive the light. Ethan didn't open it. He kept his eyes on her instead. You ever think about leaving medicine? She blinked. That's random. He shrugged. You're good at this. The digging, the fighting. Doesn't feel like pathology anymore. Elena smiled, but it was tired. I used to think saving a life meant preserving tissue, reviving a heartbeat. Now, I'm not so sure. You're still saving lives, Ethan said, just in pieces. Later that night, Ethan sat with Emily in the quiet of the hospital room. Rain brushed the window panes like fingertips. The television played old black-and-white reruns on mute. She sat curled up on the bed, drawing again. This time, the page showed a long table. At one end, a child sat alone. At the other, faceless adults in lab coats all pointing at her. He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't need to. I used to wait, Emily said softly, for someone to come get me. But no one ever did. He felt a lump rise in his throat. I'm sorry. She looked up at him. You came? He swallowed. I didn't know I was supposed to. I just saw you in the water. You pulled me out, she whispered, not just from the river. Her voice was small, fragile, but clear. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for the small guitar that always seemed to end up in the corner of her room. Tuned down, soft. He strummed a slow, gentle melody. She watched his hands, watched his face, and then, unexpectedly, she began to hum. Off-key, halting, but unmistakably hers. It was the first time she'd made music since she'd come back. Meanwhile, outside, under the low glow of a security lamp in the hospital's west parking lot, a man leaned against a black SUV holding a burner phone to his ear. I told you she'd crack, he said to the voice on the line. She's not a risk if we pull her now. A pause. A clipped, muffled response. She's recovered enough to remember. If she talks to a judge. Another pause, then a sigh. Understood. He hung up, pocketed the phone, and opened the SUV's back hatch. Inside, a black case. Military-grade tranquilizer kit, duct tape, a folded photo of Emily, age 5, marked with a red X. Back inside, Elena walked the dim hospital hallway with a clipboard in hand, her thoughts too loud for the silence. Something didn't sit right. Not with the discharge summary from Northbridge, not with the missing names, and definitely not with the funding line marked External Authorization Clearance Red. She paused beside the nurse's station and pulled up the hospital's visitor logs. A new name, Caleb Voss. Private security, temporary clearance, authorized access level critical care wing. She frowned. We don't have a critical care wing. Who gave this authorization? She asked the night nurse. The nurse squinted. It came from the top this morning. Admin office signed it. Elena's heart skipped. She turned and started walking fast. Ethan laid the guitar aside as Emily finished her sketch. This one was different, a cabin in the woods. Smoke curling from the chimney. A child on the porch holding a guitar. A woman at a window watching. He stared at it, heart tightening. That's not a memory, he said. She shook her head. It's a maybe. A soft knock at the door startled them both. Elena entered quickly, eyes urgent. Ethan, we need to move, now. What's going on? There's a breach in security. Someone's here who shouldn't be. Emily's face drained of color. Do you know who Ethan asked? I have an idea. What do we do? I've got a secure room prepped on the lower level, Elena said. No windows, one entrance, lockdown capable, but we need to move fast. Emily stood without being told. Her hands were trembling, but she was upright. Ready. Ethan reached for her hand. She took it. They slipped out the side door just as the lights in the hallway flickered once-twice and went dark. Across the hospital, the man in the tailored coat reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver keycard. He slid it into the restricted access panel outside room 218, but the room was already empty. He smiled without humor, then turned and walked slowly calmly toward the emergency stairs where a red light blinked above the door. Secure, sublevel, engaged. Time was running out, and for the first time in years, Emily Sanders was running toward something instead of away. The emergency stairwell echoed with hurried footsteps as Ethan, Elena, and Emily descended into the underbelly of the hospital. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, casting long shadows that stretched and recoiled like specters. "We're almost there," Elena said, clutching a keycard and a thick folder to her chest. The lockdown room was part of the original hospital design built for seismic events and chemical spills. No windows, one door, reinforced steel. Ethan glanced back at Emily, who moved silently between them. Her hand never left his. She hadn't said a word since the power had gone out, but her eyes wide-focused were watching everything. "Do you think he's armed?" Ethan asked under his breath. Elena didn't slow. "If he's here, he doesn't need to be. People like him use silence, systems, authority. If he lays a hand on her, he risks exposure. He won't do that unless he's desperate." "So we make him desperate first," Ethan muttered. They reached the sublevel, an unmarked corridor lit by backup generators. It smelled of dust and antiseptic. Old pipes clanked above, and the air was cold with concrete chill. Elena swiped her card at an unassuming steel door. It clicked open, revealing a room no larger than a small garage, 2 cots, an emergency kit, and a panel of controls on the wall. She ushered Emily inside. Ethan followed, locking the door behind him with a mechanical clunk. "We stay put until sunrise," Elena said. "By then, the Federal Review Board will have Judge Meredith's affidavit and the contents of the Northbridge file. If anything happens to us tonight, every major agency gets that data dump." Ethan exhaled. Failsafe, 3 of them. Emily stood near the far wall, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked more fragile than she had in days, but there was something else in her posture now. Not fear, resolve. Elena lowered her voice. "There's more." Ethan looked up. "What I reviewed, the internal funding trail for Northbridge. Their parent company is owned through a shell corporation, one that links to a consulting group tied to a former federal contractor in biomedical defense. The man who authorized Emily's removal in 2010, let me guess, Caleb Voss," Elena said. "And he's not just a security contractor. He was the senior compliance officer for Project Reticle, an off-the-books behavioral program targeting memory manipulation." Ethan felt like the air had thickened. "You're saying Emily wasn't just a victim, she was an experiment. She was the experiment," Elena whispered. "And she's the only one who survived." Outside in the darkness above, Caleb Voss moved like a man on a golf course, calm, deliberate, practiced. He held a black flashlight with a strobe override sweeping each corridor methodically. A hospital orderly tried to intercept him. Voss flashed a badge, murmured about fire drill protocol, and walked right through. He was in no hurry. He already knew where they were. It wasn't about catching them. It was about what came next. Inside the bunker room, Emily stood silently before the locked door, eyes fixed on the metal surface. Ethan approached her slowly. "You okay?" She nodded, then added, "He used to come in after the lights went out." "That's how I remembered him," Voss Elena asked. Emily nodded again. Ethan kneeled so he could meet her eyes. "He can't get in here." Emily looked past him to the corner of the room where her drawing pad rested. She picked it up, flipped to a blank page, and began to draw. Fast, urgent strokes. Elena leaned over to look. A man in a suit, tall, eyes blacked out, standing in a room full of screens, and in front of him rows of beds. Children, all facing the same direction. "I wasn't the only one," Emily said. Ethan's stomach turned. "Where are the others? I don't know. Some never woke up." A soft knock on the steel door snapped every head around. 1, 2, pause. 1, 1. A pattern. Calm. Confident. Ethan stepped in front of Emily, instinct firing like a flare. Then came a voice. Muffled. Precise. Elena Martin. Ethan Cole. You've made this far messier than it needed to be. Elena's jaw clenched. Caleb Voss. Dr. Martin, the voice continued, you were once a rational mind. Do you truly believe the justice system will protect you, that this girl's trauma will result in anything but a sealed courtroom and a gag order? Ethan spoke. You kidnapped her. You drugged her. You erased her. I saved her, Voss replied. We were building a protocol to help children forget trauma. Emily was a statistical anomaly, an outlier in retention resilience. She clung to identity like a virus. She resisted what should have freed her. You stripped her of everything Elena snapped. And yet Voss said she still draws, still sings, still remembers. That's the beauty of human design. You can't delete soul. Emily stepped forward, then face pale but steady. She shouted through the door. You said I didn't belong to anyone. Silence. Then Voss's voice quieter. You don't. She placed her hand on the steel. You're wrong. And for the first time her voice was strong. I belong to me. The power flickered again and then went out completely. Emergency red lights bathed the hallway outside. Elena turned to Ethan. He'll try to override the door. How long do we have? 10 minutes tops. Elena moved to the far corner, opened a control panel, and pulled a hidden laptop from a wall safe. What is that? The data dump. Every file, every name, every procedure. She turned to Emily. You want to finish this? Emily nodded. She stepped forward, looked at the blinking cursor on the screen, and typed a single sentence. My name is Emily Sanders. I remember everything. Then she pressed enter. Transmission sent. 10 floors up, a federal agent at the State Investigative Bureau received a ping. 5 seconds later, his phone lit up with alerts. 10 seconds after that, his superior was calling Washington. And in one quiet, red-lit sublevel, a 17-year-old girl stood straighter than she ever had before, knowing that for the first time in her life they were running out of places to hide. By the time sunrise crested the trees beyond the hospital, the world had already shifted. A federal van rolled through the parking lot just past 6 a.m., unmarked but unmistakable. Inside sat 2 agents with orders from Washington and access to files that had until 12 hours ago never officially existed. Ethan watched them through the glass, one hand resting lightly on Emily's shoulder. She stood beside him with her arms folded, chin lifted, a quiet defiance in her stance. They'll try to act like they were part of the rescue, Elena muttered beside them, like they knew all along, like they were waiting for the right moment. Ethan gave a low grunt. They weren't. No, Elena agreed. But we just forced their hand. They stood together in the hospital's main atrium, the scent of coffee mixing with antiseptic and exhaustion. A nurse offered Emily a muffin she politely declined. She hadn't spoken since her declaration the night before. I belong to me, but something in her had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. The agents were calm, courteous, and terrifyingly efficient. Special Agent Dana Quinn, early 40s, suit to, crisp hair pulled tight, took the lead. She greeted Elena with a handshake and a half smile. We've reviewed the data transmission, including the Northbridge files, the discharge papers, and the visual documentation submitted by the subject. You've created quite the ripple. It wasn't about making noise, Elena replied. It was about telling the truth. Quinn nodded. And you told it well. She turned to Emily, then knelt slightly so their eyes met. Emily, I want you to know you're not required to speak with me unless you want to. You've been through more than anyone should. Emily looked at her steadily. Then, to Quinn's surprise, she extended a hand. Will you help me see my mom? The agent blinked. Yes, I will. An hour later, a secure state van pulled into the private staff entrance. Natalie Sanders stepped out first, visibly trembling. Her face was thinner than the photo Ethan had seen, lined by 17 years of waiting. Her hands clutched a small photo album tight to her chest. Beside her, David Sanders exited second, stockier, stiffer, with the air of someone who hadn't spoken in weeks and didn't intend to start now. Ethan waited by the security desk. "You sure about this?" he asked Elena quietly. "She asked to see them." "She's ready." Ethan nodded once, then turned toward the hallway. Emily stood at the end holding her sketch pad like a shield. She had dressed herself that morning in the soft blue sweater a nurse had brought, simple calm. She saw the couple walk in, and for a second Ethan thought she might freeze. But she didn't. She walked forward. Slowly. Like every step was a decision. Natalie's face broke open. "Emily," she whispered. The girl stopped a few feet away. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just reached into her sketchbook and pulled out a page. It showed a woman in a green sweater holding a child on a hiking trail, a golden retriever at their side. Behind them, mountains and sunlight. The drawing was soft, peaceful, a memory. Natalie's voice cracked. That was the day before we lost you." Emily nodded. "I remember the dog's name. Baxter." David took a half-step forward but stopped. His face was unreadable, mouth pressed into a line. Natalie glanced at him, then back at Emily. "Can I hug you?" she asked. Emily hesitated, then nodded. They folded into each other like two broken halves of something sacred, the kind of hug that doesn't come from reunion but from resurrection. Later, in a quiet lounge with a view of the river, Ethan sat across from David Sanders. Neither man spoke for a while. Finally, David cleared his throat. I used to think if I ever saw the man who found her, I wouldn't know what to say." Ethan gave a half-smile. "Saying nothing's okay, too?" David shook his head. "No. I need to say it. You didn't just pull her out of that river. You pulled us all out." Ethan looked down at his coffee. "I didn't do it alone." David's voice cracked. "Still, you were the only one who didn't look away." He slid something across the table. A worn photograph. Ethan and Emily taken from hospital security footage the morning after her rescue. She was asleep. He was watching her like she might vanish. "I'll never forget that image," David said. "It reminded me what a father looks like." Ethan blinked, throat tightening. He had no words. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, Emily stood on the hospital lawn, her sketch pad open in her arms. Elena stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her like a guardian angel with a medical degree. "You did it," Elena said gently. Emily tilted her head. "It's not done." Elena smiled. "No, but now it's yours to finish." They stood in silence for a while. Then Emily asked, "Can I stay with Ethan a little longer?" Elena nodded. "You get to choose now, Emily. You get to choose everything." Emily looked toward the parking lot where Ethan leaned against his truck tuning his old guitar. She walked over, sat beside him, and listened. He played softly a tune half remembered and half made up. When he stopped, she spoke. "I drew something." He turned to her. "Yeah." She opened her pad. It was a house, a porch, 2 chairs and a guitar, 3 mugs of tea. No labels, no names. Just belonging. "It's not a memory," she said. He smiled. "It's a maybe." She shook her head. "It's a want." At that moment, far from Oregon, a private server deep in an undisclosed facility lit up. Dozens of files marked redacted began unlocking. The names inside wouldn't stay buried long. Because one girl remembered, and the river always remembers with her. The hearing was held behind closed doors on the 3rd floor of the Marion County Courthouse. No press, no cameras, no public seating. Only the necessary parties, a judge with eyes like granite and a silence so tight it felt like glass under pressure. Emily stood beside Elena at the long oak table, her palms pressed flat, her breathing measured. She wore the same soft blue sweater. No makeup, no dramatics, just truth. She didn't fidget, didn't smile, She stood like someone who had waited a decade to be heard and was no longer willing to be small. Judge Meredith, an austere woman with white hair and a silver pen that never stopped moving, looked down at the Northbridge folder with an expression of barely masked contempt. "Let the record show," she said, "that the state of Oregon has reopened the case of State versus David and Natalie Sanders in light of new material evidence and testimony from the previously presumed deceased minor, Emily Sanders." A quiet wave moved through the courtroom. Even now the words sounded like fiction. Elena cleared her throat. "Your Honor, I would like to submit into Evidence Exhibit D the behavioral and pharmaceutical logs obtained from Northbridge Institute confirming Emily Sanders was enrolled in unauthorized cognitive conditioning protocols between 2008 and 2010. Judge Meredith raised a brow. "Without consent of her guardians, correct," Elena said. "She was signed in under a false identity bypassing all federal oversight and missing persons tracking systems." The judge looked to Emily. "And you, Ms. Sanders, are you prepared to offer corroborating testimony?" Emily met her gaze. "I am." The courtroom hushed. "I don't remember every day," Emily said, her voice even. "I don't remember the first time they changed my name or the exact words they used when they told me my parents weren't real." A ripple of emotion crossed David and Natalie's faces from across the room, but they didn't speak. They'd been warned this was Emily's moment, not theirs. "But I remember the lights," she continued. "I remember the sound of machines at night. I remember being told not to cry because it would undo my progress. I remember the music they played before injections. And I remember asking for my mother." Elena stepped in. "Your Honor, we have digital records, EEG readings, and one signed discharge note referring to subject memory degradation failure." That failure in plain terms was Emily's persistence. She remembered through the fog. Judge Meredith folded her hands. "And what of the charges against the parents?" Elena nodded. "We have evidence of procedural manipulation during the original investigation, suppressed testimonies, falsified behavioral evaluations, and a critical piece of forensic data withheld from the defense, a soil sample that disproved the possibility of body disposal at the campsite. Why wasn't that surfaced earlier? Because the lead investigator on the case later accepted a consultancy role with Northbridge's parent firm." Judge Meredith sat back, fingers steepled. "In all my years," she said softly, "I've never seen a system work so hard to bury a child." After the session adjourned, the Sanders family and Ethan were escorted to a private conference room while the court prepared a formal statement. Outside, word had already begun leaking, first through courthouse staff, then through legal observers. By the time the courthouse doors opened to the public, the name Emily Sanders was trending online across 3 states. Ethan paced near the window. Emily sat in the corner, legs crossed, drawing quietly. Natalie stood nearby, watching her with a sort of holy reverence, like she was afraid to blink and lose her again. David approached Ethan slowly. "I owe you more than I can say." "You don't owe me anything," Ethan replied. David looked down. "You saved her. You stayed. That matters more than all the years I spent locked in a cell believing I failed her." "You didn't fail," Ethan said. "You were failed. All of you." David's voice cracked. "Still, thank you." Back at the hospital later that afternoon, as the chaos settled into motion, a federal investigation announced an independent commission launched Northbridge staff summoned by subpoena. Emily returned to her room for one last night before discharge. Ethan walked in with a bag slung over his shoulder. "You ever been camping?" he asked. Emily looked up. "Not really." Why, he pulled out a small folding chair, a canteen, and a tin of marshmallows. "I figured if we're starting new memories, we might as well start them right." She blinked, then smiled, small but real. "You brought marshmallows to a hospital room. Improvisation is my specialty." Elena arrived moments later holding a manila envelope. "Official clearance," she said. "Emily's legal identity is restored. Birth certificate, social number, school records reactivated. You're no longer a ghost." Emily reached for the envelope but didn't open it. She looked at Ethan. Can I still come with you? For a little while, Ethan hesitated. You sure? She nodded. Home doesn't feel like a place. Not yet, but you feel like calm. His eyes stung unexpectedly. Then yes, of course. That night on the hospital roof, Elena's idea, they roasted a single marshmallow over a candle stub, while the sky turned lavender. Ethan played his guitar. Emily hummed along. Elena sat cross-legged on a blanket sipping tea and smiling like someone who had finally laid a ghost to rest. Emily turned to her and asked, "What made you look into me?" Elena thought for a moment. Because you weren't afraid, and because you drew bolder lines than the people who tried to erase you. Emily nodded, then whispered, "I think I'll be okay." Ethan reached over and gave her shoulder a squeeze. "You already are." Far across the country, the first subpoenas were delivered by hand. One to the last CEO of Northbridge, another to a silent partner whose name hadn't appeared on record in over 15 years. Each envelope marked with the same subject line, R.E. Emily Sanders vs. Northbridge Institute Civil Action. Prepared. This time, the story wouldn't fade. This time, they'd remember. And this time the system would answer to the child it tried to forget. The press conference took place in a modest conference room inside the Oregon State Justice Center. The room was small but tense, humming with the charged presence of cameras, reporters, and legal aides standing shoulder to shoulder. On the backdrop behind the podium, 3 logos were displayed: the Oregon Department of Justice, the Federal Office of Child Protection, and most recently added the Civil Liberties Accountability Task Force. At the center stood Judge Meredith. Her voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the static of media murmurs. This morning, the court vacated the 2009 convictions of David and Natalie Sanders after conclusive evidence revealed their daughter, Emily Sanders, previously presumed deceased, was alive and had been unlawfully detained and experimented on by a private research facility operating under falsified federal authority. Flashbulbs erupted. Pens scribbled. Fingers danced across keyboards. Judge Meredith continued unwavering. A federal investigation is now underway into the practices of the Northbridge Institute and any entities connected to its operation or funding. Further, the Oregon State Judiciary will launch a full review of cases prosecuted under the same investigative authority responsible for the Sanders conviction. She paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle. I would like to emphasize that this court failed the Sanders family. The system failed them. But they stood and they waited, and in Emily Sanders we now see proof that memory cannot be silenced and that justice, though delayed, is not beyond reach. The applause was quiet, restrained. This was not a celebration, but a reckoning. Back in the hospital, Ethan sat beside Emily watching the live stream from a laptop perched on her tray table. Emily wore headphones, her fingers clasped around the edge of the screen, eyes wide but dry. When the judge said her name, Emily Sanders, her lips parted slightly as if hearing it aloud was something foreign and sacred all at once. Elena stood near the doorway, arms folded. She just made national news. Ethan glanced at her. You think she understands what this means? She doesn't have to, Elena said. She feels it. That's enough for now. Emily removed the headphones. Will they go to jail? The people who did it. Elena stepped closer. Some of them. Yes. The rest, they'll answer in other ways. Financially, legally, publicly. Emily nodded slowly. I don't need revenge. I just want them to stop hurting other kids. Elena smiled faintly. That's already happening, thanks to you. That afternoon, Ethan took Emily for a walk near the river, the same river where it all began. Her discharge had been processed, and for the first time in 17 years, she wasn't under legal custody or institutional supervision. She was free. The trees lining the riverbank had begun their slow descent into fall. Leaves rustled in amber and ochre, and the breeze carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Emily kept close, but not out of fear. It felt natural now. They walked in silence for a while, then she asked, Do you think it'll always feel like two lives? The one before, and this one Ethan considered. Maybe. Or maybe it'll feel like chapters in the same book, some darker than others. But they're still yours. She looked up at him. Do you ever feel like that? Like your life has chapters? He nodded. Before my wife died. After. Before I lost my son. After. And now? He gave her a small smile. This part feels like a new page. She smiled, looking away quickly, but not before he saw the color rise in her cheeks. Back at the truck waiting on the passenger seat was a brown envelope Ethan had picked up from the courthouse earlier. He handed it to her without a word. Emily opened it and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her eyes skimmed the top line. Subject: Request for Special Guardianship Consideration. Petitioner Ethan Cole status approved pending consent of minor. She looked up at him speechless. I figured Ethan said since everything's been decided about you, it's time someone asked you. Would you want to stay with me just until you're ready? Or longer? Only if you want. She blinked rapidly, holding the paper like it might disappear. You really want me there? I didn't pull you out of that river just to drop you off at the nearest doorstep, he said. I don't think either of us ended up in each other's lives by accident. She didn't say anything. She just threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. And for a long moment, Ethan didn't care who might be watching. He wrapped his arms around her like someone anchoring a soul to a safe harbor. That evening, the sky cracked open with a gentle storm. Rain tapped softly on the windows of Elena's small home office where she sat with a steaming mug of tea and a thick binder marked Sanders, Civil File. She stared at the screen, her email open to a new message. Subject line: Unregistered survivors. Northbridge Extensions attached was a list of names. Not all were children. Not all had made it out. But each name was someone worth remembering, worth fighting for, worth writing into the next chapter. She picked up her phone and dialed Ethan. You sitting down? She asked when he answered. He chuckled. Isn't that always how this goes? I think we're only just getting started, she said. I was afraid you'd say that. But maybe this time Elena added her voice softer. We don't have to do it alone. Ethan looked across the room at Emily curled on the couch, sketching a little cottage with flowers in the windows and a guitar on the steps. He smiled. No, he said. We don't. At that exact moment, somewhere on the East Coast, a man in a three-piece suit stepped into a sterile room with a digital archive spanning 2 walls. His assistant waited beside a console screen glowing faintly. It's confirmed, the assistant said. The Sanders file triggered 23 dormant case links, all tied to terminated cognitive behavior programs. The man exhaled slowly. Open them. Sir, open them, he repeated. It's time the whole story came out. And in that moment, what Emily began the quiet refusal to forget spread like a ripple across the very river that once tried to drown her. Because memory is not weakness, and the truth always resurfaces. The cabin was small, worn at the corners, and smelled faintly of cedar and dust. It sat on the edge of a clearing just outside Silverton, half an hour from the hospital, an hour from the city, and a lifetime away from the walls that had once held Emily prisoner. Ethan unlocked the front door and stepped aside. It's not much, he said, but it's quiet, and the roof doesn't leak. Emily stepped inside without hesitation. She paused in the doorway, eyes scanning the mismatched furniture, the woven rug, the tiny kitchen with the crooked faucet and the chipped blue kettle on the stove. I love it, she said. Ethan exhaled tension he hadn't realized he was carrying unwinding from his shoulders. The first night home wasn't meant to feel grand. It was meant to feel safe. Elena had helped gather the essentials bedding toiletries groceries. The social worker from the Department of Child Welfare had already conducted a home inspection and cleared Ethan for temporary guardianship. Emily's legal status had been reinstated. Her name cleared, her records corrected. But paperwork didn't fix trust. Healing would come from something slower, deeper, daily. That first evening she sat on the floor beside the fireplace while Ethan made grilled cheese on the stove. She didn't say much, neither did he, but the silence felt different than before. It wasn't the silence of trauma, it was the silence of beginning again. The next morning, Ethan found Emily outside barefoot in the dewy grass sketchpad balanced on her knees as she watched the sunrise filter through the trees. He stood at the door for a moment, just watching her, how her shoulders moved when she exhaled, how her pencil moved in slow, careful strokes like she was anchoring herself to the present. She looked up when she heard him. "You ever wake up and forget you're free?" Ethan stepped down from the porch. "Sometimes." "How long does that last?" He sat beside her. "Not forever." She didn't look at him. "It still doesn't feel real. That I get to sit outside, that I get to breathe without asking. You don't need permission to exist, Emily. I used to." A long pause stretched between them. "I want to go see the others," she said finally. Ethan turned. "What others?" "The ones who didn't get out. The ones from the rooms. I know they're still out there." He hesitated. "We don't even know where I want to help them," she said. "I don't want this to be just about me." Ethan studied her face. She wasn't being idealistic. She was being honest. "They'll need someone who understands," she added quietly. "Someone who remembers." Later that day, Elena arrived with a carload of donated books, a box of paints, and a file folder thick with sealed documents. "I thought we were done with paperwork," Ethan said, raising an eyebrow as she dropped the file onto his dining table. "This isn't for you," Elena said. She turned to Emily, who stood barefoot in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders. "These are profiles," Elena said. "Sealed survivors. Kids from similar facilities, some were adopted out under different names. Some are adults now. Some might not even know what happened to them." Emily stepped forward. "How many 23? "That we know of. More could surface now that the Northbridge lawsuit's going federal." Emily opened the file slowly as if each page were sacred. Photos, notes, birth years, disappearance dates. Her own story multiplied by 23. She swallowed hard. "We have to tell their stories." "We will," Elena said. "But only if they're ready." Emily nodded, then looked up. "When do we start?" Ethan met Elena's eyes. A question passed silently between them. She smiled. "How about now?" That evening they hosted their first dinner in the cabin. Just the three of them. A pot of chili, a loaf of bread. Nothing fancy. Emily picked the music soft instrumental piano and set the table with unmatched plates she'd helped unpack earlier. During dinner they didn't talk about trauma or lawsuits or courtrooms. They talked about songs they liked, books they wanted to read, the fact that Ethan didn't know how to cook rice properly, that Elena once fainted in a cadaver lab, that Emily had never seen snow but really wanted to. It was in every way a normal dinner. And for someone who had lived under flickering lights and injected silence, it was revolutionary. Afterward, as Ethan washed dishes and Elena sipped wine on the porch, Emily sat at the kitchen table and began a new drawing. This time she sketched 3 figures sitting around a table. There was no lab, no darkness, just warm light, laughter, a sense of something she was still learning to name. When she finished, she wrote a word in the bottom corner in bold, even letters. Home. Far from the cabin in a windowless federal office, 2 agents reviewed a new incoming file. Subject Emily Sanders' status civil witness, level Alpha Access Request Case Expansion. Identified associated minors. One of the agents looked up. "She's creating a list," he said. The other smiled grimly. "She's building a case. Do we have a directive?" Pause, then not anymore. "She does." That night, as rain began to fall on the cabin roof and wind curled gently through the pines, Ethan sat beside the fireplace with a guitar in his lap, picking out a quiet tune. Emily sat on the floor with a blanket over her legs, watching the flames dance her eyes steady and calm. Elena looked at them both, then leaned back in her chair and whispered mostly to herself, This is what justice looks like. Not a courtroom, not a headline, but 3 people who refuse to let pain define the final page. And somewhere out there 23 names waited no longer forgotten, no longer silent, because the girl who remembered had decided to help the world remember too. The snow came unexpectedly. Light at first, just a dusting across the roof of the cabin, but by mid-morning, thick flakes fell in soft spirals from a sky the color of polished pewter. It was the first snowfall of the season, and for Emily, the first she had ever truly seen. She stood barefoot on the porch, wrapped in one of Ethan's old flannel jackets, arms tucked close, eyes wide. The snow settled on her hair, her sleeves, her eyelashes. "It's cold," she said with a small laugh, "but it's not scary." Ethan, standing behind her with 2 mugs of hot cocoa, handed one to her. "That's because you're not alone in it." She nodded, watching as her breath turned to mist in the air. The clearing was still. The world felt brand new. Inside the cabin, the fireplace crackled and hissed. A pot of soup simmered on the stove. Elena sat at the kitchen table reviewing the latest batch of emails updates from newly identified Northbridge survivors who had begun reaching out after Emily's story aired nationwide. Some were hesitant, some confused, a few angry, but most were grateful. One message stood out. "I thought I made it up. The white walls, the humming machines. I thought I was broken. And then I saw her speak. I saw her draw the room I remember. Thank you for reminding me that my pain was real and that it's not too late to heal." Elena smiled softly and closed the laptop. Later that afternoon, the 3 of them drove into town. Emily had insisted on visiting the local bookstore. She wanted to pick out gifts for the survivors she'd been writing letters to. She chose carefully stories about courage memory starting over. Books with quiet heroes. Books where the endings weren't perfect but hopeful. She paid with a $20 bill she'd earned helping the local librarian organize the archive section. "It's the first money I've ever spent," she told the clerk with a grin. "That I earned." The woman behind the counter beamed. "Then I'd say you just bought something priceless." That evening, back at the cabin, they decorated a small tree Ethan had chopped down from the edge of the woods. Emily made paper stars. Elena hung old ornaments from her childhood. Ethan strung lights that flickered unevenly but gave off a warm, golden hue. They didn't need perfection. They just needed presence. When the tree was done, Emily turned off the overhead lights and the room fell into a soft glow. She stood back, arms folded, studying the finished product like an artist admiring her canvas. "I never had a tree before," she said. "At least not one I remember." "Well," Ethan said, "now you do." She smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes. Later, the 3 sat in a loose circle by the fire. Outside, snow whispered through the trees. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Emily reached for her sketch pad, now thick with images of the life she'd begun rebuilding. She flipped to a blank page. "I want to draw the ending," she said softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Of what?" "This story." "You think it's over?" Elena asked. "No," Emily said. "But this part is. The part where I was lost." She drew slowly, deliberately. 3 figures. One girl standing barefoot in the snow looking up with open arms. A man beside her with a guitar slung across his back. A woman holding a book, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. Behind them, a cabin. Above them, snow falling. No cages, no shadows, just sky. She held it up. "This is how it ends." Ethan studied the drawing for a long time. "It's beautiful." Emily nodded. "It feels like truth." Before bed, Elena stepped outside for air. She stared up at the stars, clear and bright against the night sky. The air was sharp, but it carried peace. Behind her, she heard the cabin door creak open. Ethan joined her, handing her a mug of tea. "She's going to be okay," Elena said. "She already is." They stood in silence for a while, watching their breath drift upward. "You know," Elena added, "I used to think healing was about going backward, undoing, erasing. But now I think maybe It's about going forward while carrying the weight and realizing it doesn't have to break you. Ethan nodded. She's stronger than all of us. She made it out, Elena said. But more than that, she came back with light. They stood there until the cold nipped at their fingers and then quietly returned inside. Emily was asleep by the fire sketch pad, resting on her chest, the last drawing glowing faintly in the lamplight. Ethan pulled a blanket over her, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. As he straightened, he noticed something new on the page she'd left open. She had written a single line below the image. The river tried to forget me, but I remembered first. Ethan read it again, then smiled. Not every story ends with fanfare. Some end in a quiet cabin in the woods, with healing, with snow, with hope, and the girl who remembered finally home, forever. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear from you in the comments, your thoughts, your feelings, or simply where in the world you're tuning in from. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. We share stories like this every week, stories of hope, healing, and the quiet power of kindness. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care and never stop believing in the good that still exists in this world.